Hi, welcome to an episode of Mama Janna and Company. Today I'm going to teach you how to make sauerkraut. Now, I have a lot of German heritage in my family ancestry lines. So we grew up eating sauerkraut. I actually didn't like it when I was a kid because I went to a parochial school and one of their big fundraisers was a sauerkraut supper. They had a lot of German families from that school. They would make the sauerkraut at school and cook it at school, and it would just permeate the halls of St. Paul Lutheran School for weeks. And so I wouldn't eat it when I was younger. When I got older, I started trying it again and found that I actually really love sauerkraut. It's really good for your gut health as well, so it has a ton of benefits to eating it. And I'm going to show you how to make that today. Some of the tools I'm using have actually been in my family for over 100 years, which is really cool. And I love using those tools and thinking about my mom and grandma and great-grandma and great-great-grandma that use these very same things to make sauerkraut. The process has not changed. It's been this way for literally hundreds of years. So it's kind of fun to use those. As I get to each step in the process, I will tell you about that tool that I'm going to use to make the sauerkraut with. Sauerkraut is just cabbage and salt. That's all it is. It basically ferments in its own juices. Just like when you put sugar on strawberries and they start to juice, when you put salt on cabbage, it does the same thing. And it produces a juice. So all of the fermentation that happens in an anaerobic environment, that environment without any air. It's just liquid. And so that ferments. I do a pretty mild kraut. I do like a 10 to 12 day sauerkraut. Some people like it a lot stronger, and you can do like a 2 or 3 week kraut. My family really likes a mild kraut, so that's what we're going to do because I just love the taste of it with that mild flavor. So this is my old family kraut cutter. It's made of probably birch wood, and it is well over 100 years old. I make sure that every time I use it, once I finish the sauerkraut process of shredding all of the cabbage, I wash it off really well, dry it out really well, and then I put wood conditioner on it to continue to protect that wood. These blades, I've never sharpened them, and I'm afraid that if I ever took them out, it would actually split the wood because this antique is so old. So I just take really good care of them, make sure they are dried off really well, and they are still incredibly sharp. So I just take a piece of cabbage that's been wedged, and you literally just slide it over those 3 blades. As you slide it over the blades, it slices those so uniformly and just puts really nice thin shreds of the cabbage, which makes really good sauerkraut when they're all uniform like that and when they're very thin like that. So there's also a safety feature block. This probably originally had this piece or a piece like it, and a very dear friend of mine made this for me because he was afraid I was probably going to slice off my fingers at some point because these are seriously that sharp. So how you use this is you put the cabbage in there when it gets down low, and you just move this back and forth. A lot of times you can put pressure on the top with another piece of cabbage, and that way you can get all of that cabbage shredded and not have to go to the ER because these blades are really, really that sharp. So that's the shredding aspect of it. Once I shred it, I put it in a bowl, and if there's pieces that don't shred, these, you'll see these larger pieces here. Once I get down so far, it's just very hard, even with the protector, to shred those. So I just put those in a bowl, and then we will actually make baked cabbage with these leftover pieces, so nothing goes to waste. So I'm going to show you then what we do to the next step of this process when we put on the salt. Okay, so now I'm going to show you how I weigh out and determine how much salt goes in the sauerkraut. For every 5 pounds of cabbage, I put in 2 tablespoons of salt. Some recipes call for a lot more than that. I don't like it saltier than that. So I'm going to go ahead and turn on my scale there. I have another bowl that obviously I've already used to put sauerkraut, or to put cabbage in. And so I'm going to go ahead and continue adding the cabbage that has been finely shredded until it gets to that 5 pound mark. I love having a kitchen scale for things like this. It just comes in very, very handy, and you can do some exact measurements and not have to guess. So, okay, so we're at that 5 pounds. And now you literally just take and sprinkle 2 tablespoons of salt over that sauerkraut, or over that cabbage. And I used this Morton canning and pickling salt. Some people like to use the Celtic sea salt. You don't want to use any salt that has any additional things added to it. No anti-caking properties or anything like that can be added, just the salt. Once that salt has been added, I actually kind of squeeze this cabbage to tear these shreds a little bit, and that just helps start that process of getting that salt really well mixed in there, and it helps it to juice a little bit faster too. So I just keep on squeezing a little bit. We use a lot of kraut throughout the year, so we use it on hot dogs. We actually make a soup that's called Reuben soup, and I put my homemade sauerkraut in that. I just eat it plain sometimes. I put it on salads. There's a lot of ways that you can use sauerkraut. So I'm going to let that sit and juice for just a couple minutes before I add it in to my big crock, and you'll see that process when I come back. Okay, now that this is juiced just a little bit in the bowl, we're going to go ahead and dump it into this old crock. This old crock is another piece that has been in my family for well over 100 years. And it is hard to fathom how many pounds of sauerkraut have been made in this. I just dumped in another 5 pounds of cabbage, so that makes, there's 20 pounds of cabbage already in here, and it's only to like here in the crock. So this is where the tamper comes in. So you want to take and push that down very firmly, and you go all the way around the outside edge and then work your way in around the inside edge. And that presses that sauerkraut, or presses that cabbage really close together. Now you can use different types of cabbage to make sauerkraut. The only kind you can't use is Savoy cabbage. It's not suitable for kraut, but you can use any other cabbages. You can use red cabbage, although its flavor sometimes is a little less interesting than the green cabbage. And also, it's interesting to note that if you harvest green cabbage after there's been a cold snap, it actually has a sweeter flavor. So your sauerkraut will have a little bit sweeter flavor. So you can kind of change a little bit of the flavor by when you harvest it. And now that I've gone all the way around, you can see that there's more juices coming up. So if I press down on this tamper, you can see that. And that is just the cabbage and the salt. That's all that's in there. We have not added any liquid at all. So I'm going to keep on going until I fill this crock up a little bit more, and then I'll show you what I do to continue to make it an anaerobic environment to ferment that cabbage. Okay, so now what I'm doing is just doing one final tamp, and you can see how much juice there is just from that cabbage and that salt creating all of this nice excess juice. So if for some reason when you make your sauerkraut you don't have this much juice, you can see the line on the tamper, when I press down, how high that goes up there. If you don't have that much, you can make a brine with the solution of 4 cups of water and 1.5 teaspoons of salt. And so that's what this brine is. And what I'm going to do is, and you can pour that in here if you need to, I'm going to put my top, which is actually one of my pizza stones, and then I kind of press that down. You want to make sure that all of that cabbage stays submerged in that water. And then you weight it down. And this is brine in this container. So if you don't have this much liquid, again, pour some of that created brine that you made on top of there. And then you just keep that weight on all the cabbage. And then I put this on top. I make up a brine solution in here just for some reason, if this were to fall over and were to spill out, it's brine and it's not going to ruin your fermentation process with water. Now what I need to do is I'm going to cover this whole thing with a cheesecloth, and then I will check it every day. If there's any scum that creates on the top of the surface, you just skim that off and check on it every day. You want to wait till it's a little bit cooler or put it in a cooler environment. You don't want this to be fermenting when it's like 90 degrees in a room. So between 65 and 75 degrees is a great temperature for fermentation to occur, and then we will check on that in every day, but then I will go ahead and in 10 days to 12 days have sauerkraut. Okay, so now I'm going to put my tea towel over it. And that just keeps any dust from coming into the crock, and we'll check on it every day. Hi, so we are at the 12-day mark. I do that 10 to 12 day kraut. Some people do theirs for like 2 to 3 weeks. I don't care for it that strong. So we're going to check on this. I've been checking on this every day just to check to see if there's any scum or anything. We're still anaerobic. We still have that liquid there. This is that brine. I'm going to go ahead and take my pizza stone off of there. And then I'll go ahead and start getting that sauerkraut out. And here's what we do as a family. I take some of the sauerkraut and I put it in a pan and I heat it up to can it. You do a water bath canning process with this for long-term storage. Sauerkraut's really good for you. So if you are making a smaller batch, you don't have to can it. You can just put it in the refrigerator, and I'm going to switch over to a different tool here. You can just put it in the refrigerator and keep it in the refrigerator. As long as it stays under the liquid, you can store it there for several months. It depends on how fast you eat your sauerkraut. We use ours literally all year long, and so because of that, we do long-term storage on that and do that canning process with it. It has a nice scent to it because I like the smell of sauerkraut. And sauerkraut has so many health benefits. It's really good for your gut health. It has a lot of antioxidants in it, which is really good. It has a lot of those probiotics in it, which is really good for you. It's supposed to reduce stress. I'm not sure about that, but I like eating it, so maybe. But we eat it all year long. So I take the sauerkraut out of there, and you can see by looking there. Yes, there's liquid, but it's not like a soup in here. So what I've done is I've taken and made a brine solution just like this one, which is that 4 cups of water and 1.5 tablespoons of salt. And when I use this for canning, I'll make that brine, cool it down, and pour it over this kraut, and then heat everything back up and put it in the jar. So I'll show you that process next. Okay, now that I've got my sauerkraut over here in my big pot, I'm adding some of this brine to it, because when I can it, you want to make sure that it has that brine in it in the canning jars as well. Now, by canning it, you're actually heating it up and you are killing some of that beneficial bacteria. It's the most health benefits come when you eat it fresh and you take it out of your canner and put it in the refrigerator. That's going to be the most beneficial as far as those gut health bacteria and probiotics. But we eat it throughout the whole year, so we do have to can it. So it does lose some of that health benefit, but you still gain a lot of health benefits. So we're going to heat that up, and then once that's heated up, I've actually have my jars already. They're in my water bath canner. I do a wide mouth jar. I can that with wide mouth jar pints. I do some quarts as well. I've got my lids ready, my rings ready, everything ready to go. Remember, when you're canning, everything has to stay very sterile. So everything has been sterilized, and I wash my hands well and use the utensils that have been sterilized as well. Okay, now we're actually doing the canning process of this sauerkraut. So you just take out one of your clean, hot, sterilized jars. You take several scoops of the sauerkraut. I'm actually going to use this funnel. The funnel works great for the regular mouth jars. I use it also on the wide mouth jars when I'm doing things like sauerkraut, anything that doesn't just pour in there easily. And then I want to make sure that I get some of that liquid in there as well. So you pour some of that liquid in and add just a little bit more of the kraut. So all of that is underneath. Now what I do is take a wet paper towel and I wipe around the top. That does two things. It checks for cracks and it gets anything off of there that could prevent a seal like that salt. Then you take one of your lids and put it on. I take one of the rings and I put it on. You don't want to press down in the middle. You just kind of want to press down on the edges when you put that ring on. Tighten that up and then I'll set that aside and do the next thing with all of these jars until I have them all filled. Okay, now that I have filled all of these jars, I'm going to go ahead and put them in. This is called a water bath canner. Sauerkraut does not require pressure cooking. You can just do the water bath method for sauerkraut. What you need to do is make sure that when you put these in the canner, that water is over the top of those lids by a little bit. And we are definitely going to be good on the water levels here. So once I have the last one in, and I make sure that that comes back to a complete boil, then I will set the timer for 10 minutes and can these for 10 minutes. Okay, my timer just went off for the 10-minute mark. So what I'm going to do is shut off the stove, take off the lid, and let this sit for about 5 to 10 minutes before I take them out of the canner. The reason why you do that is if it cools down too quickly, you lose too much liquid that comes out when the air comes out as well. So if those sit just a few minutes, it prevents some of that seepage. Okay, so we like to use sauerkraut fresh sometimes instead of just eating the canned sauerkraut. So if you want to take your sauerkraut once you have fermented it and just put it in a container, you can just put it in a container and put it in the refrigerator. And then it will store in the refrigerator for several months. Make sure you put enough liquid in there as well. And that's where that, created brine comes into play. And then you can pull it out whenever you want a crunchier sauerkraut that has a little more of the probiotic benefits of it. So like I said, we eat kraut year round, and this is a great way to keep you from having to can all of it also. Okay, I've went ahead and filled this up to the top. And I'm going to add a little bit of this created brine to it. Again, that's at 4 cups of water and 1.5 tablespoons of the salt. And then you can use one of these plastic lids or even just a regular wide mouth lid and ring to just cover that up and then store it in your refrigerator. I like it this way sometimes because it's a little bit crunchier, and that way I don't have to water bath can several of these big jars. Okay, now that we have let those set in the canner for a few minutes, I go ahead and set them on a tea towel on the counter. You just heard that little popping sound. That's one of those jars sealing. So the rest of those will all seal if they haven't already in the canner. And then you let them set there for about 12 hours before they're ready to put in your long-term storage. I also carry the lid of the canner with me when I take those jars back and forth, and that's just so that the water can just catch here and not drip on my feet or drip on the floor. So that's how you make home canned sauerkraut. Thanks for watching this video. If you'd like to see more like it, please like and share this video with your friends.